Thanks everyone for joining us. Just to be aware, we will be recording this session. We haven't commenced the recording yet. The plan of attack is that we'll go through this webinar through all the slides, and we'll actually, just because it's being recorded, we'll leave the questions till the end. We can always go back to slides after the end. So a couple of things. Emerging Industries Open Call. If you do have questions on the chat, what we'll do, and yeah, I just ask if people can mute their microphones and the video conference until we get to the questions at the end. That would be greatly appreciated. So thanks everyone for joining us today. I think we're entering a new phase in 2020 with another exciting process in the AgriFutures Emerging Industries Open Call. I'm Tom McHugh, the Senior Program Manager for Emerging Industries at AgriFutures Australia. I'm also joined by Brian Ruddle, who is the Chair of our Emerging Industries panel. And the two of us are going to go through a presentation today about the Open Call and what it entails. So yeah, the way we're just going to structure it, we're going to give a bit of background on the Emerging Industries program and the strategy, how we've come together with a maturity model for our Emerging Industries program. We'll talk about the key elements of the current Open Call process and try and address any frequently asked questions and common myths that have been posed to us either directly at AgriFutures or via some of our panel members. We will then probably have a session of just going through the chat questions that have come through, and then open it up for questions and answers from everyone. And then to finish off, we'll just go through the timeline for the Open Call. So what I'll do is I'm going to pass over to Brian Ruddle, who's the chairman of our Emerging Industries panel, to give an outline on the Emerging Industries strategy. Over to you, Brian.
That's great. Thanks very much for that, Tom. Sorry, I just had to unmute myself. And welcome, everyone. So with the Emerging Industries strategy, as the name implies, our whole focus is on looking at the next generation of industries in Australia. So the mandate we've been given is to really identify and support emerging industries that can reach or exceed that 10 million gross value of production threshold. And I suppose we're not being specific, if you like, in terms of which areas we're supporting and things like that. Our focus is on industries. So I suppose the one thing to point out in terms of this overall strategy is we're interested as a panel in receiving applications where multiple parties can be involved in the supply chain. We've had a number of inquiries around supporting individual companies, and Tom will probably touch on this a bit later on as well. And we can look at those, but our big focus, and I suppose the focus of the decision making within the panel structure is, will the support that we provide through AgriFutures help build an industry? And so that's the main focus there. Do you want to go to the next slide, Tom? So this is our third Open Call. So we've closed the first one. The second one, we did assessments a few weeks ago, and there's some further discussions going with those groups. So this is our third call. We've supported a number of different industries. They're listed there, but range from plantago to camels to insects to sesame and things like that. And again, the big focus there is on how we can grow these industries through the AgriFutures support. Next slide. Thanks, Tom. So the way that we've structured this, and some of you may have been involved in the previous webinar, is into 3 streams. So stream A is really focused on building earlier stage clusters. So these are smaller industries, less than 2 million gross value of production. I suppose the thing is with that in terms of the support model that we've got around that, it's a smaller amount, so indicative about $50,000. I'll go through so that you can see in the middle there where it's talking about the investment support. It's the same for all of them, and each of the streams, and I'll go through that in a bit more detail in a moment. But just going back to that stream A, the cash co-investment is desirable, and the same with all of them. We do need commercial engagement, it's mandatory. Stream B is building industry capability. So this is for industries that are starting to grow. They're between 2 million and 10 million of gross value of production. The upper limit in terms of funding support is higher. It's 200,000 per annum. We do require a minimum 25% co-contribution, and that's mandatory for Stream B applications. And of course, we do need that commercial partnerships. And then Stream C is expanding the industry potential. So this is for those industries that are more than 10 million in gross value of production. Again, it's 200,000 per annum. We require a 50% co-contribution as a minimum. And again, those partnerships with commercial players is mandatory. Going back to that middle section where we talk about the investment support, we're trying to be fairly broad. And that's demonstrated from those dot points in terms of supporting forums, networking events, industry conference sponsorships, travel support for subject matter experts. So there could be subject matter experts overseas that particular industries want to bring in to Australia to help resolve particular problems. Doing work around economic analysis and strategic planning. The identification or scoping of R&D gaps. So that could be technical or entrepreneurial type approaches. Overall industry scaling of R&D, horizon scanning, and then the usual sort of R&D investment to sustain investor and customer confidence and growth, and sort of also looking at value adding both domestically and internationally. So the reason we've kept this very broad in terms of the particular areas that we're looking to invest in is because each industry is facing their own particular challenges to grow. And coming back again to the purpose of this particular program is to support those industries and sort of help to overcome those challenges so that their gross value of production can expand. So individual businesses can expand. So we're really looking to fund industry problems rather than individual company problems. Next slide there. Thanks, Tom. So the key elements, and actually, Tom, I might hand back to you if you want to go through the process. It's probably the easiest thing.
Yeah, sure. So some of the key elements of the current open call process is really about taking what Brian's just prescribed to you in the maturity model approach that we've taken and actually looking at how we can support each of those maturity stages. And so certainly we have different investment, I guess, amounts to enable different maturity phases, but we're also focusing heavily on making sure that there's a continued pathway for growth. And I think that's quite important when people are thinking about their applications. As Brian alluded to, we're heavily dependent on a co-investment approach going forward. We obviously want to see that industries and other applicants that are applying actually have taken the effort to engage with that industry before they submit to us to ensure that there's buy-in from other partners. I'll then point out a thing called the Emerging Industries Canvas, which is really about, and I'll go into a bit more depth shortly about this, but it's really a tool which is used in the application process to help you identify key areas of the value chain within your own sector. What are some of the gaps and opportunities that might exist, and then how does that transition to R&D? We do have some additional criteria as well that are included on the application page, which we would like you to respond to. These are in a separate Word document so that people can address a number of criteria that we felt wasn't necessarily well addressed in every application in the past, but certainly is really important to understand what your key drivers are for your particular sector. So it's really important that you give us really clear responses in that additional criteria. I will talk about intellectual property. Obviously, it's an important issue for many people when thinking about submitting to AgriFutures. I think we'll cover that in a little while, but the last area is investment types, and you saw on that previous slide there were quite a number of options for applicants to address, whether it's early stage workshopping, getting subject matter experts in, through to your core research and development and extension projects that you might need to offer to address your emerging industry need. So we'll go into just a couple of FAQs that we've heard not only leading up to this webinar today, but in previous rounds as well, because they are common questions that people ask. The first one, and I get a lot of it on the phone, is who can actually apply for the investment call? And it's really open to industry representative organisations, leading businesses, researchers, and other interested parties. Now, when I say that, as we've mentioned, we have a strong industry focus, so it's really important that anybody applying has consulted with the relevant industry association or body that might exist for that particular sector. Now, in a lot of instances, if one doesn't exist, people ask me, who should I liaise with? And you certainly should definitely look at who are the key players that are potentially looking to form together to develop a network to support that industry. So if one doesn't exist, talk to the key players and the people that are trying to make that request, and be explicit in your application. Just mention if there isn't a representative body that isn't representing that industry when you're putting your submission in. But yeah, I'd like to stress that you must demonstrate whole industry benefit. It's really important that your application demonstrates how the industry is going to grow and prosper towards that 10 million GBP that we mentioned earlier. So I mentioned a moment ago what a canvas is. It's a tool that's been developed to really help individuals and companies really take an inward-looking approach to what the gaps and opportunities are. We use it predominantly just to enable not only applicants but even AgriFutures to have a close look at how an industry's value chain might look like, what are some of the gaps and growth opportunities that exist in that sector, and how they can be resolved through RD&E, research, development and extension.
Sorry, it's Brian here. Sorry for interrupting, but just one other thing that I think is really relevant with this as well is the canvas lets the committee know, whether what we're doing is supporting a company or a group that really understand what the industry requirements are. And so it's actually a really important part of the process, because getting back to my earlier comments about supporting industries rather than just benefiting an individual company, this canvas actually helps demonstrate that.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's certainly something we'd like applicants to carefully consider. If you've got any questions about, by all means, feel free to contact myself or members of the panel prior to the submission of your application. It is attached as a Word document and does need to be completed and submitted with your application. Another common question we get asked, and we talked about the 10 million GBP. Question that gets asked is, I don't know my industry GBP, how do I calculate it? The Australian Bureau of Statistics actually measures gross value of production for a number of industries. That being said, not necessarily every industry is measured, particularly emerging industries. So what we've done is actually provided a link on the applicant page to actually guide people of how the ABS actually calculates GDP. Certainly, you know, we expect that all applicants make an estimate, preferably using the methodology, but being really clear about how they came to those figures when they put the submission in, and how the project that they're intending to undertake, should it be successful, will contribute to further growth in their industry. So how will the GBP grow as a result of the research, development and extension project that they're conducting? Another one that's come up is, I have valuable intellectual property, should I note it? The short answer is yes. It's a requirement that any intellectual property and freedom to operate needs to be described in the application. So while you might not go into great depth in the initial application about the specifics of the technology, just the fact that you're flagging that there's some sensitive intellectual property is requested, so that we can then look at how that might impact on the project itself, and whether or not there's any other requirements that we need to address from an IP perspective. A similar question, I'm an entrepreneur, how does AgriFutures calculate IP? Well, we're a government agency. We obviously have a public interest in our process for delivering back to the emerging industries. So if you are to be successful in the contracting phase, the IP will be calculated on financial in-kind contributions for any project IP generated. As I've mentioned a moment ago, you should identify existing IP in your application and freedom to operate should any third-party material be used in the project. And obviously we need to ensure that our projects demonstrate whole industry benefits. So we often start with a much higher equity stake and use tools such as licensing and other factors when we consider intellectual property. So it's important that we have the ability to make sure that the industries that we're doing RD&E for have the ability to have access to the outcomes of the project. So yeah, we certainly look at that as a first point of call in the negotiations. So what do I need to submit is often a question we get asked. Well, in the first instance, you'll be asked to submit a preliminary research proposal via AgriFutures Project Management System Clarity. I'll go into some of the steps of how you do that shortly. As we've flagged a couple of times in this webinar, an emerging industry canvas is also required to be submitted, which also includes an estimate of your GBP. The additional selection criteria document that we talked about. And I do stress that you ensure you clearly outline the industry's challenge or opportunity that you feel is important to be addressed in the investment that would be provided by AgriFutures. Any letters of support is highly advisable, and we would prefer that you actually do submit letters of support from other parts of the industry, and also just to read the terms and conditions of the application process, which are all available on the website. So what are we looking for? I think we've touched on a few of the key documents that we put on the site, but I think, you know, certainly some of the observations that we've had in previous rounds probably outline the following points. We obviously want you to give a convincing argument that the RD&E methodology that you're proposing clearly demonstrates the industry need. We certainly want you to outline how you're going to achieve the methodology in your proposal. A clearly defined canvas demonstrating the applicant's knowledge of the industry. As Brian pointed out before, it gives a lot of insights, not only for AgriFutures as a funder, but also the applicant, to really clearly think out who the key people within the industry are that need to be part of your work, and also how they will have a relationship throughout the life of your project. An itemised budget for the project. There isn't a template as such that comes with the application process, but we do ask that if you're going to put costings in there, that you break it down into components so that you can give us some understanding of how you're intending to use the dollars. Obviously, should you be successful and move on to further rounds, we look at that closely together, but certainly in the first instance, if you can give us an itemised costing of what you're trying to do, that will go a long way. Importantly, our assessment panel is looking for investable projects. And we don't want something for a particular industry that is a nice to know, but certainly, or an event just for the sake of it. We actually want to have an outcome that will have a growth benefit and a tangible solution for the industry. So we certainly want you to focus heavily on that concept when you put your application in. And that leads to the next point. You know, having a clear methodology will be really important to help us understand what you're trying to achieve. We don't just want a sales pitch. Sometimes in applications, people assume that the panel that's assessing it knows you personally, and they'll assume that you know previous work or methodology. What we want to know is obviously a track record, but more importantly, what are you going to do now, and how you're going to do it is quite important, because you know, obviously we want to know how you're going to achieve the goals that you set out to achieve in your project. And also outline all the beneficiaries within the industry that you're targeting. Be really clear on who it is that is going to benefit from the work that you're going to deliver in your project. Importantly, demonstrate how the production system will adapt to your new industry and your project. How will the requirements of the crop, animal, or aquatic system that you're trying to address in your proposal actually be achieved or implemented? How will, you know, a grower or a fisher or another person in the industry that's going to take your outcomes of your RD&E project and actually apply that in their farming enterprise? If you're going to run events, be specific, like how many workshops, trials, etc. will you conduct, where will they be located, who you're targeting to attend within the industry that you're trying to target, and obviously how do you be inclusive of the industry to ensure that you get a wide representation. Preferably, if you've got any barriers or challenges to success in doing the work that you have, you know, can you foreshadow any issues that might prevent the success of the project achieving its goals? Are there any hurdles or barriers? And a couple of examples are on the screen there with regulatory and lack of infrastructure, but of course there are others.
Tom, I might just add just something on that slide just before you do move on. The panel is very practical in our approach, and so all of those things that are mentioned on that slide are really important, because when we're looking at the applications, we're looking at it from the perspective of, you know, can this be implemented? Who's going to be involved? Will it deliver an outcome? Is it being too ambitious? So we're looking at things from if we're investing into a particular project, that there's a degree of comfort and confidence that it can be delivered, that there'll be an outcome and it's going to add value. And so, I know Tom raised it on the previous slide. In previous rounds, we've had a lot of sales pitches, things like "you'd be mad not to invest in this" and things along those lines. That doesn't actually sway the panel. We're actually after well thought out, structured projects that we can see that if we put the money into those projects, they're really going to be a benefit in driving an industry. Sorry, Tom, I'll hand back to you.
No worries, thanks, Brian. So yeah, just moving on, we have had study tour requests in the past, but we've also had a question quite a fair bit on the phone as to who should attend these study tours. I think from AgriFutures' point of view, given that we are taking an industry approach, we expect that the primary applicant to do this type of work ensures that a wide range of expertise from the industry targeted participates and contributes to any study tour that you might have. Importantly, also, if you're going to do a study tour, that there's a really clear articulated methodology of how you're going to communicate the findings of your tour back to the wider industry when you return. We have had instances in the past where the methodology of what they want to achieve is clear, but not how it's actually going to get back to the industry that they're trying to service. And the study tour does need to be clearly linked to an industry need, and how the visit or visits will address that need. I think it's really important to clearly articulate that when you're putting a proposal in for a study tour. So this one's more of a operational question that's come in, and actually can cause a lot of grief for applicants and for us for that matter, where people don't have a user profile on Clarity. I will state that every applicant needs to have their own user profile. We don't want people using another person's user profile to put a submission in, because there's obviously people that need to sign off on these application processes from the organisation that's been represented and putting the proposal in. So there is a detailed procedure on the Emerging Industries Open Call webpage. I'd like to encourage people that are on the system to please register, if not today. Don't leave it to the last minute, because we did get a flurry of late registrations in the last round, which caused a lot of grief for applicants. A lot of them got quite stressed, and so we do ask that you put that proposal in as soon as possible. But in terms of registering, definitely do that early in the piece so that we can make sure that you're all set up properly. We are cutting off the registrations 1 week before the close this time around to make sure that people have actually done the actual administrative side of registering on Clarity. One thing that has caught quite a few people out in the past is there is a principal investigator and administration officer as part of the application process. And in some instances, it might be the same person that performs both roles, but the way our system works, both roles need to approve the application to complete the submission. So if the principal investigator puts the application in, it's up to the administration officer to also approve the application so that it gets into our Clarity system. It's really important that applicants are aware of that, because a few people got caught out last time where they didn't get their administration person to approve the submission through.
Does that mean that the admin officer also has to be separately registered?
Yes, that is correct. So the administration person also needs to register, because there's actually different workflows in Clarity to communicate with principal investigators and administration officers. As I mentioned, in some instances that might be the same person might perform both roles. So moving on, where do I find all the attachments? They're all on the website at the www.agrifutures.com.au/emerging industries open call 2020. You need to ensure that all the PRP, preliminary research proposal, and attachments that we've outlined earlier are submitted by the closing date, which is 12 noon Australian Eastern Standard Time on the 6th of March. Now, you'll see on the website, it does actually list the time zones for all states and territories. We had a few people that got caught out in different parts of the country, not realising that the 12 noon is Wagga Wagga time, which is where we're based here. So pay close attention to the date and time. So just before we move it to an open question and answer session, we have received one through the chat. Sorry, actually, I take that back. Another one's just come through. So the first question is, can any of the expenses incurred to date be taken into account for the co-contribution? Generally, the answer is no to that. We obviously treat every project on a case-by-case basis, and the IP is calculated on the actual financial implications of the current project. That being said, if there's existing intellectual property, that's accounted for in the negotiation phase. Not necessarily, it doesn't contribute to in kind though. The second question is, can you view the canvas prior to engaging with a consultant for the submission? So the onus here is that the applicants actually complete a canvas as part of the submission. If I've interpreted this correctly, yeah, the canvas can be shared amongst the industry prior to you submitting your application, but it's up to the applicant to actually submit that. So hopefully I've addressed that question, and if not, please raise it in our open Q&A. And then the third question was, can you send slides to us? Well, this, as I mentioned, for the people that have joined us, this session is being recorded, and we will be converting it to a video which we will place on the open call webpage as quickly as possible. That video, it's a video which will include the audio and slides that we've been going through today. So we've actually just received another question. Please clarify actual industry GDP. If demonstrated potential GDP is indicated clearly, will applications be considered? Hang on, sorry, just back to that question. Yeah, so the answer to that is, yeah, obviously the more accurate, the better. If there is an actual GDP, that's even better as far as we're concerned. But certainly, in any instance, whether it's clearly disseminated or not, we need to ensure that applicants can demonstrate how they're going to achieve the 10 million GDP target. The next question is, just to clarify, the goal is that any new IP gained is to be shared with the industry. Yes, the answer is yes. So certainly, I mean, we're here to make industry grow. Obviously, if there's sensitive intellectual property, they'd be negotiated on a case-by-case basis. But our overarching mandate, as Brian and I have both alluded to, is to make sure that we're investing in RD&E that will benefit the whole industry. So, yeah, that is the overarching premise. If there is sensitivities, we'd have to treat them on a case-by-case. That appears to be all the questions that we've received via the chat. Hang on, we've just received another one. Oh, it's just disappeared. How to register for clarity. The link on the website goes to a login screen, not a registration screen. Can you send a link? We might actually, I'll just pass that one on to our admin team to potentially follow up with you after the session. But there should be some instructions on how to register on the site to enable you to get into Clarity. If not, please feel free to contact myself or Sarah, predominantly Sarah, who's in our emerging industries team, to provide some assistance to you. Sorry, another question has come in. Are any selection criteria weighted more than others? At the moment, we don't have a weighting system on our selection criteria. We treat them all equally. So unless there's other questions on chat, what we'll now do, another one's just come through. Oh, sorry. Are there any industries that are excluded because they've received funding before? Now, that's actually a really good question. Because you've received funding before doesn't necessarily preclude you from being able to apply again. Not at all. If anything, it's the important part is what Brian and I mentioned. It's about you being able to demonstrate the methodology and to be able to clearly identify how whatever RD&E project that you're proposing can clearly demonstrate those industry. So yeah, we're not discouraging people at all from putting an application into an industry that's previously been supported. So unless there's any other questions via the chat, we might just quickly open it up to general Q&A from people. If there's any Q&A questions that they'd like to ask on the webinar. Just a quick one. If you do have a question, you will need to unmute yourself. Sorry, we did mute you all initially, but yeah, you should be able to unmute yourself on the go-to meeting controls. Sounds like somebody's just tried to unmute themselves. Yeah. All right, so whoever tried to unmute themselves, there was a very bad echo. Apologies for that. But if you're having audio troubles, please feel free to put the chat through. Send it through via chat. Otherwise, we can contact us directly. What we might just. Oh, we have a question.
It's Bob here on the other side of the campus from you. I was just wondering, like, how do you define an emerging industry?
So there's a number of mechanisms to do that. In an earlier slide that we had, we actually have conducted some market research called the Coriolis scan, which was a piece of work that was done in 2017 by Coriolis, which identified a number of potential industries that warrant consideration by AgriFutures. From that point of view, it goes into some depth about what some of those opportunities look like. From that point of view, it also gives some understanding of who the key industry players are and what some of the gaps are. Now that is available on the Open Call site, that report. And we also had a piece of work done by Euromonitor as well, which is also available on the Open Call website. These are two reports that are worth reviewing, and they went into some depth about what some of the opportunities may look like in emerging industries. So we've got a few more questions just coming in via the chat. I'm just getting Sarah to bring them up for me, so just bear with me 1 second. Hopefully that answers your question, Bob. Otherwise, yeah, come over the hill and see us. Yeah, so a question is there a PRP Word document? Unfortunately, if you the PRP submission is all done online. Next question. Can the PI be changed? Oh, sorry, I'm assuming that's IP. Can the IP be changed, adjusted at a later date after initial submission? So the steps are, if you're successful with a PRP, we would then go into a full research proposal, which we would get you to detail specifics about the project, and intellectual property, obviously, and budgets and other things could be adjusted in that process.
Tom, I think that might have been right, actually. I think that was the principal investigator sort of changing the PI as the proposal goes through.
So generally what will happen with principal investigator, sorry, I've got to learn all my acronyms. With the principal investigator, we would contract, obviously, with a principal investigator by the end of the full research proposal process. Now that person may change, but obviously we'd want to be clear that whoever is that personnel has been endorsed by the industry if it makes dramatic changes to the proposal. One thing we should point out is if you do change your principal investigator, they would then have to register as well on the Clarity system. And if it's after contracting, project variation process. Question, could we come and visit you face to face? We've got a person working on a project and would like to visit while in the country. Of course. Could you please explain in more details what a 25% co-contribution would be? Well, I guess this is if the budget was $100,000 as an example, we would expect $25,000 of co-contribution from another party or parties for that matter. And we prefer cash contributions so that there's buy-in from those parties as well. Next question. No, it looks like that's all. I'll just give it a couple more seconds for questions, and if we don't have any more, we'll move into the timeline. No, it doesn't look like we've got any more coming through, unless there's any verbals. Or, oh no, here comes one. How important are international partners as part of the value chain, e.g. if they either purchase or contribute? It's context specific. Obviously, at the end of the day, we want the industry to grow towards its GDP target. Some industries may have a heavy international focus, others not. So, and the experience has shown in some of the industries that we've supported so far, some are very domestic operations, others have quite strong export markets and international markets. So it would really come down to the individual industry that you're targeting. It doesn't necessarily give you an advantage by putting in an international partner, but I think it comes back to what we said earlier about clearly demonstrating your methodology, and with any personnel that you might be proposing, how they are contributing to the project to make sure that you're going to get the best possible chance of success. Any more questions? No, I think that's it. So what we might do, if you do have further questions between now and the closing date, the contact details are on the website if you need to get in touch with us. They'll also be at the end of this presentation. So yeah, just please get in contact with us if you've got any further questions. Just moving into the next slide, which is the actual timeline. So as you've seen, we have quite a series of steps that we go through. Today's webinar is really about making people aware of the process and the specifics about the proposals. The call will close on the 6th of March at 12 o'clock, and I will correct, it's Australian Eastern Daylight Time, but please regularly check the website for any amendments or changes. We will publish them on the website if anything does change. Ideally we won't, but yeah, just keep an eye on that as you're proceeding. You'll be notified by AgriFutures by the 3rd of April of the success of the first stage and whether we need you to submit a full research proposal for step 2, which would then be required in by the 24th of April 2020, and then you'd be notified by the 15th of May of the outcome of that round, and then negotiation would start with the successful applicants. So that's the emerging industries investment call. Obviously, this is the 3rd one. We're excited to work closely with industry. We're just going to do one last check on any questions, but all looks to be okay. There's nothing else at this point. If you do have further questions, the contact details are on the screen. Yeah, feel free to get in touch with us, and we look forward to speaking to you. One thing I will point out, there's a couple of channels that we would highly recommend you all subscribe to. The first one is the Emerging Industries newsletter, which gives regular updates on tenders and other proposals, investment calls, and we'll be looking at things like previous projects. The other thing I should point out is a large majority of AgriFutures staff, myself included, and Sarah, and our emerging industries panel will be at Evoke Ag, which is being held in Melbourne in a couple of weeks. So please come and channel us out. If you are registered for the event, please use the tools in it to arrange a meeting with us. We will be quite prominent around the conference. If you need to talk to us, there is an AgriFutures booth at the event, and one of us will be there at all times and can get us if you need to speak to us face to face. We did have one last question. Can we see previous year's projects? All the active projects are actually located on the AgriFutures website. One of the things we might do is actually just provide some links to that on the open call page. So that's a good suggestion. Thank you very much for that. So yeah, the projects that we've invested in are all online, but we will create a little mini directory of the existing projects and previous projects. All right, thank you very much, everyone, and have a nice lunch. Thank you for taking the time in your lunch break. We much appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.